Hi, let's talk about English school theory. The origins of the English school can be traced back to the late 1930s. Unlike theories rooted in the behavioralist tradition or positivist theory, the English school represents a synthesis of moralist and rationalist approaches. It is, in other words, a school of thought that focuses on the moral, political, and social properties and rules of the international system, and that shows how these properties and rules both constitute and constrain state interest and action. Although the name of the school was not officially coined until the early 1980s, the school continued to evolve in the 1960s and 1970s with the writings of Hedley, John Vincent, and Martin Wight. In perhaps his most well-known work, The Anarchical Society, Boole sought to demonstrate the nature of the moral and normative rules with which states learn to cooperate, and to shed light on the normative constraints of international order and decision-making. Generally speaking, the school comprises three traditions of political theory: Grotianism, Kantianism, and Hobbesianism. Grotianism, which is based on the writings of Hugo Grotius, a Dutch lawyer and statesman of the early 17th century, represents the rationalist strand of thinking in the school. By contrast, Kantianism and Hobbesianism signify the universalist and realist strands of thought in the school, respectively. Each of these traditions refers to a different set of structural principles that comprise an explanatory framework for understanding international politics. Whilst Grotianism refers to the rational constraints of domestic law on the state and international society, rationalism, Hobbesianism represents the anarchical character of the international system, more particularly, the warlike conception of the interstate society rooted in the distrust and heated competition between and among states. Kantianism, in contrast, represents the moralistic and universal strand of English school thinking, in which international solidarity is characterized by the duty to act in accordance with international principles of accountability and equal respect. It is important to stress the differing strands of thought in the English school. Here one encounters two fundamental strands in English school thinking, solidarism and particularism. Whereas the solidarists prioritize collective security and cosmopolitan right in their analysis, particularists emphasize the normative value of state sovereignty, or rather, the incentive that arises from asserting and preserving state sovereignty through cooperation. By the 1980s and 1990s, the solidarist strand assumed an arguably more prominent role in English school thinking, especially in the context of the debate concerning the objectives and duties associated with humanitarian intervention. Solidarists, such as Tim Dunn and Nick Wheeler, challenged the particularist version of humanitarianism advocated by Vincent by stressing the collective responsibility to protect the rights of severely abused peoples. This debate would generate increasing discussion of the issue of whether the transition from an international to world society required broader sociological and institutional analyses of the global civil society. Barry Buzan, for instance, argues that the focus on human rights, while generating many important insights, is only one essential area of study. Equally important are the economic sources of international and world society, which address the role of NGOs and other non-state actors, such as terrorist groups. Whether one agrees with Buzan's efforts to design a systematic English school theory, his argument does call attention to certain limits in English school theory. Perhaps more important, his critique underscores a resurgent interest in English school theory during the post-Cold War era and the prospects of expanding English school theory, particularly in terms of explaining and understanding the evolving role of ethics, social values, global power, and universalist notions of solidarity and peace. Thank you for listening.